Welcome back to American Civil War Facts. Today's topic, Grant versus Lee, Rethinking America's Greatest General. One general crushed strongholds, split the enemy country in two, never lost a campaign. His name became a rallying cry for victory, and a target for those who called him a butcher or drunkard. The other was hailed as a genius. Grant, branded a brute with only numbers on his side. But history isn't legend. It's victory by destroying 3 armies and rewriting the course of the war. So, was Grant truly a great general, or just a blunt instrument backed by Northern industry? By the end of this video, you decide which general deserves the title of the Civil War's greatest commander. Let's get to it. In the aftermath of the war between the states, Ulysses S. Grant was widely hailed as the savior of the Union and promoted to General of the Army of the United States, a role he held until the first of his 2 election victories as president. In spite of his fame and accomplishments, Grant's reputation was damaged by scandals during his presidency and later by lost cause adherents seeking to elevate Southern generalship and denigrate Grant's military prowess. Born in 1822, Ulysses S. Grant graduated from West Point in 1843 and brevetted for bravery several times during the Mexican War. But he resigned his commission in 1854 at the rank of captain, allegedly for drunkenness. For the next 7 years, he tried farming, bill collecting, sold firewood on the streets of St. Louis, and finally settled for working in his father's leather goods business. Despite his litany of failure, Grant rose from obscurity to becoming commanding general of all Union armies, and eventually President of the United States. But Grant's post-war reputation was distorted by Southern proponents of the lost cause narrative. This campaign significantly damaged his reputation for decades. Southern and some Northern writers, politicians, and historians painted Grant as a ruthless military butcher and drunkard who owed his victories to the sheer size and resources of the Union rather than superior generalship. And while Confederate General Robert E. Lee is rightly elevated to stand as one of the greatest generals America has ever produced, Ulysses Grant, until relatively recently, was not. But if a general's standing is to be judged by victories, U.S. Grant must rank alongside Lee. Let's walk through Grant's battles and campaigns and see how each impacted the course of the war. Belmont, November 7, 1861. When the war came, Grant was clerking at his father's shop. Seizing the opportunity to rejoin the military, Grant offered his services, but was twice rebuffed. He excelled at recruitment, however, and through political connections was appointed military aide to Illinois Governor Yates. In June of 1861, he was appointed colonel of the 21st Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment. In August, Grant was made Brigadier General of Volunteers and appointed commander of the District of Southeastern Missouri, and his area of operations extended to embrace southern Illinois and western Kentucky. Soon, he began planning to thwart Confederate designs on Kentucky and southern Illinois. Grant's first real test came at Belmont, Missouri. With about 2,500 Union soldiers, he struck a Confederate camp of 5,000 men. Grant's forces overran the position, but Confederate reinforcements forced him to withdraw. While tactically inconclusive, the bigger impact was psychological. The battle gave Grant both combat experience and practice at commanding large units. Also, Belmont kept Confederates wary of Grant and forced them to divert resources, allowing the Union to strengthen their grip on the still neutral border state of Kentucky. His aggressive spirit was also noted by his superiors, setting the stage for greater trust in his abilities. Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, February 6 through the 16th, 1862. Fort Henry, on the Tennessee River, and nearby Fort Donelson on the Cumberland anchored the center of Albert S. Johnston's defensive line in Tennessee. Capturing them would not only break Johnston's line, but enable the Union to use the rivers for further operations southward. To break this line, Grant led around 15,000 men, backed by Andrew Foote's Union gunboats, against a poorly defended Confederate garrison of 2,500. It was a swift victory, and while Grant was in overall command, it was Foote's gunboats who forced the Confederate surrender, but it gave the Union control of the Tennessee River that would become a supply highway straight into the Confederate heartland. Just days later, and 12 miles away, Grant marched on Fort Donelson, which guarded the Cumberland River. Here, 25,000 Union soldiers clashed with about 16,000 Confederates. After fierce fighting, Grant demanded unconditional surrender, and nearly 12,000 Confederate troops laid down their arms. These twin victories had an enormous ripple effect. They opened both the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, turning them into Union supply arteries, and caused the collapse of the Confederate defense line in Kentucky and Tennessee, forcing a broad retreat. Nashville, an industrial center, fell soon after providing the Union with a vital base for operations in the Western Theater. Impressed by Grant's aggressiveness, President Lincoln promoted Grant to Major General of Volunteers, and Northern papers bestowed him the moniker Unconditional Surrender Grant. Shiloh, Pittsburgh Landing, April 6th and 7th, 1862. Then came Shiloh, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Grant's army of 45,000 suffered a surprise dawn attack by Albert Sidney Johnston's 45,000 Confederates. The rebels pushed the Federals to the banks of the Tennessee, but Grant rallied the next day, and with 18,000 reinforcements, retook all the lost ground for a hard-won victory. The carnage was staggering, over 23,000 casualties. The impact was sobering and profound. Nationally, it shattered any illusion that the war would be short or bloodless. But Grant's demonstration of steadiness under fire and refusal to panic, even after the first day's near disaster, persuaded President Lincoln not to fire him, despite intense criticism of Grant's lack of preparedness and the huge casualty list. The defeat left the Confederates in a difficult situation. Their losses, and the death of their theater commander General Albert Sidney Johnston, left the Deep South exposed and in need of a new line of defense. Iuka and 2nd Corinth, fall 1862. Grant's next action took place in northern Mississippi with battles at Iuka in September and at Corinth in October. He was in operational command at both battles, but William Rosecrans was in tactical command in both fights. These battles, though smaller, were critical. Together they prevented Confederate attempts to retake northern Mississippi and ensured that the Union held its gains in the West. Port Gibson, Raymond, and Jackson, May 1863. Fast forward to the spring of 1863. Grant launched his daring Vicksburg campaign to capture the last Confederate foothold on the Mississippi River. Situated on high bluffs on the east bank of the Big Muddy, Vicksburg was the most challenging operation Grant had faced to that point. The fortified city was defended by 33,000 men and 172 guns. After months of stalemate attempting to get an army on the Vicksburg side of the Mississippi River, Rear Admiral David Porter ran his flotilla past Vicksburg's guns and allowed Grant to land 2 corps south of Vicksburg near Port Gibson. Capturing that town and then Raymond opened the route to Jackson, Mississippi. The fall of Jackson, the state capital, cut off Confederate communication lines between John C. Pemberton's Vicksburg defenders and potential reinforcements from Joe Johnston. Champion Hill and Big Black River, May 16th and 17th, 1863. Unaware that Jackson had fallen, Pemberton decided to attack Grant's supply lines at Raymond. The two sides met at Champion Hill on May the 16th, where Grant's 32,000 men clashed with 22,000 Confederates in a fierce fight. The outnumbered Confederates were forced to retreat to the Big Black River and attempt to hold again. The very next day, at the bridge over the Big Black, Grant struck again, pushing the battered Confederates back inside Vicksburg's defenses. These back-to-back victories sealed Vicksburg's fate. Grant had cut off the city and put it under siege. Siege of Vicksburg, May 18th to July 4th, 1863. The siege of Vicksburg lasted over 40 days. With 77,000 Union troops encircling the city, the Confederate garrison surrendered on July the 4th. Nearly 29,000 men laid down their arms, the rest being killed, wounded, or missing. The result: the Union gained complete control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. Grant's boldness sped his promotion to Major General in the regular army and in command of the military division of the Mississippi and all Union armies between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. The Confederacy now faced coordinated attacks from multiple fronts. Chattanooga, November 1863. In September, Confederate Braxton Bragg defeated William Rosecrans at Chickamauga, forcing the Federals back into Chattanooga, where they were besieged in October. Grant rose to command the entire Western Theater and replaced Rosecrans with George Thomas, opened a thin supply line into the city, and began preparations to break the siege. In November, Grant's 72,000 men fought Bragg's 49,000 on the ridges and mountains surrounding Chattanooga. On the final day of a three-day battle, Army of the Cumberland forces, exceeding their orders from Grant, stormed Missionary Ridge, shattering the Confederate siege, routing Bragg's army, and avenging their defeat at Chickamauga. This opened the gateway to the Deep South. From Chattanooga, Union armies could march into Georgia, and eventually to Atlanta. Grant's success here earned him promotion to Lieutenant General and Chief of all Union armies. The Overland Campaign, May to June 1864. Now in charge of the entire Union war effort, Grant took the fight directly to Robert E. Lee in Virginia. Grant fielded around 118,000 men against Lee's 65,000 during the Overland Campaign, which saw costly battles at the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor. Though Union losses were staggering, and each battle a tactical defeat for Grant, he did not retreat as Union commanders had done in the past. At each check by Lee, Grant continued to attempt to get around the Confederate right flank and force Lee into a fight in the open. Lee, on the other hand, misread his opponent's strategy several times, and these mistakes nearly brought him grief. Grant kept Lee on the defensive. While wearing down Lee's army in a war of attrition the Confederates couldn't sustain. In June 1864, Grant stole a march on Lee and crossed the James River south of Richmond on a 2,200-foot pontoon bridge built by Union engineers. Lee, still defending Richmond, had lost contact with Grant and was unaware that Grant had given him the slip and was headed toward Petersburg, 24 miles south of Richmond. Siege of Petersburg, June 1864 to April 1865. From June 15th to June 18th, Grant tries to take Petersburg, still defended by only a few thousand Confederates. But blunders by Grant's subordinates and an inspired defense by P.G.T. Beauregard gave Lee time to realize his mistake and move the bulk of the army into the Petersburg defenses. When direct assaults failed, Grant laid siege to Petersburg. For nearly 10 months, Grant continually extended his lines on Lee's right flank, stretching Lee's 60,000 men to the breaking point across a 37-mile-long defensive line. On April 1st, Lee is defeated at Five Forks, and the last supply line into Petersburg is cut. Petersburg's fall means Richmond is indefensible and is evacuated. Lee abandoned Richmond and retreated westward to his supply depot at Farmville, Virginia. After resupplying his starving troops, he hoped to move south to join Joe Johnston's army in North Carolina. Appomattox Campaign, April 1865. In the final campaign, Grant relentlessly pursued Lee's dwindling army, with around 120,000 Union troops against Lee's now 30,000. On April 6th, 3 simultaneous fights around Sailor's Creek led to the capture of a quarter of Lee's remaining force. On April 7th, Yankee cavalry captured Farmville and its desperately needed supplies. On the 8th, Lee found his retreat blocked by Federal cavalry backed up by 2 corps of infantry. Lee was trapped. On April 9, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, Lee surrendered to Grant. The Civil War was effectively over. Grant didn't just win battles, he broke the Confederacy's backbone by constant pressure on all theaters of the war. He himself forced the surrender of 3 Confederate armies. His victories were unmatched by any other general of that era. He shaped the outcome of the Civil War and the future of the United States. Grant wasn't just a fighter, he was relentless and imaginative at times, and that relentlessness, though costly, brought Union victory. Grant personally commanded 27 battles, and while Grant did lose some of them at the tactical level, he never lost a strategic battle or campaign. His Vicksburg campaign is considered a masterpiece with the U.S. Army Field Manual 100-5, May 1986, calling it the most brilliant campaign ever fought on American soil. After becoming the chief of all Union forces, Grant applied constant pressure across all theaters. He and General Meade with the Army of the Potomac in the east and William T. Sherman in the west. No longer were Union operations done in a vacuum. Turning to Lee, he commanded 15 major battles, and we're counting the 7 days battles as one here. 4 were tactical victories, 7 were tactically inconclusive, but with 1 a strategic victory, the 7 days, and 1 a strategic defeat, Antietam. 4 of Lee's battles were outright defeats. In addition, his attempts to alter the strategic direction of the war also ended in failure. Both his invasions of the North, intended to force European recognition and/or collapse of Northern support for the war, were failures and more damaging to his army than anything the Army of the Potomac did, at least until 1864 and the arrival of Grant to the east. In fairness, we can argue that Lee recognized the South could not stand a long war, and his costly offensives were, to his mind, the only chance the Confederacy had. But in his desperate attempts to destroy his opponents, he bled his army white. Additionally, he fiercely resisted any attempts to transfer troops to other theaters, aside from Longstreet's temporary transfer to Bragg in the fall of 1863, which led to Bragg's victory at Chickamauga. But while he skillfully guarded the Confederacy's front door in Virginia, he let Grant to kick in the back door in the West. To recap our study, Grant fought 27 major battles. 5 were tactical draws but operational victories, the rest straight victories. Lee fought 15 battles with 4 defeats, 4 victories and 7 draws. And what of the charge that Grant was a butcher with nothing but numbers on his side? A count of the casualties inflicted by each general are pretty even. True, Grant has more to work with, but he still inflicted losses Lee could not replace. So we've reached the end. Which of these generals do you think deserves the title as greatest general of the Civil War? Leave your comments below. I'd really like to know what you think. Please like, share and subscribe for more Civil War history.